We are going to have a conversation with Neal Katyal, who is become a friend of mine, who is one of the smartest people I know about what kind of progress has been made. And let's see if Neal is, since the committee, a January 6th committee was formed on June 30th. Hi, everyone. Sorry about the technical difficulties. Neal, hi.
Hey, how are you?
I am so happy to see you. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you. Thanks. Last time I saw you, you were on a big stage.
Oh,
So,
that's right. You came to my book event in Washington. So thank you, Neal, so much for being there and for supporting me. And, I just was telling my followers, by the way, many of whom are big fans of yours, that it was so important for us to take stock of what happened 1 year ago, where we are as a country now, what progress has been made, and what we all can do together to ensure the preservation of democracy. I am increasingly worried about what's going on behind the scenes at the state level. We have so much to discuss. I interviewed a law professor from UC Irvine, which I'm going to show later, to talk about what is going on. So please, everyone, let Neal know your questions, but I have a ton of them for Neal. So I just want to remind people that it was 1 year ago today. People probably know this, that thousands of people, many thousands of people descended on the U.S. Capitol, proceeded to crash the gates and bust the windows, to maraud through the Capitol, to prevent the election from being certified. Many of them wielded deadly weapons. They went searching for congressional leaders, yelling racial epithets. 4 hours later, President Donald Trump asked them to go home. They finally did, which showed the power of his words, and why he didn't say something earlier is very, very disconcerting. When it was over, 150 Capitol police officers were injured. One died immediately afterwards, and later 3 took their own lives. Meanwhile, 4 of the protesters died as well. So Neal, we have so much to talk about. First and foremost, because I think a lot of people don't have time to follow every day what is going on in this January 6th committee. As I mentioned, it was formed at the end of June. Can you tell me what has been done and what kind of progress is being made in holding people who should be held accountable?
yeah, thank you. So there are 2 different sets of investigations. One is going on in Congress, the one you mentioned, the January 6th Select Committee. Then separately, there's a Justice Department investigation. And for both, they are somewhat black boxes, certainly the Justice Department one, but even the congressional one. So that is, like any investigation, the last thing you want to do as an investigator is like reveal all the things you know. And so we're still in.
Oh no.
Read a report
Hold
from
on.
them or anything like that. Oh,
Sorry, you just froze for a second. You just say what you said at the very end.
sure. So we're still at the investigation phase. We're not at the report stage. So we don't know actually all the things the investigators know. And that's a good thing because, you want to bring people in as an investigator and interview them. So with that said, we do know some things because some members of Congress are talking to news shows and things like that, providing a little bit of an update.
Yeah.
So
Now, let's talk. I know I had some statistics, and I'm looking at my sheet right now about how many witnesses have been brought on. Julia, I don't know if you can point that out, but they've obviously interviewed a ton of witnesses. They've also had a lot of testimony, and then they have subpoenaed Mark Meadows, the president chief of staff, as well as Steve Bannon, and they have refused to testify. They've also, I think, reached out to a number of Fox News people to see if they would testify, because what they were saying privately on text to Mark Meadows was very different than what they were saying publicly to their millions of viewers. So can you help us understand the whole contempt of Congress thing, and if Mark
yeah,
Steve Bannon can be forced to testify, or will they face prison time?
yeah, they're going to face prison time if they don't testify. Absolutely. So basically, Congress has investigatory powers and they can subpoena someone, which is make sure they show up and answer questions and provide documents. They have that authority under our Constitution and laws. And ordinarily, that's exactly what happens. Like you or I, if Congress subpoenas us, of course we go and we say something. And even more so if you're someone in the government. I mean, when I was in the government, if I had come across an employee who was afraid to testify under oath, I would say, see you later. Absolutely. So what's going on now is really remarkable. You have really senior people, the White House chief of staff. That's like basically, one step under God in the White House, basically, saying, I'm not going to testify. I'm afraid. You've got Steve Bannon, who, didn't have a position in the White House at the time, saying, I'm afraid to testify. And so they've invoked executive privilege, which is an odd thing for someone who's not even in the government to be able to invoke. Executive privilege is the idea that
It for themselves. Nobody has said you have executive privilege, right?
No, and to the contrary, the incumbent president, President Biden, has said you don't have executive privilege. I'm waiving any privilege. And the Supreme Court, in a case involving President Nixon, said it's really up to the current incumbent president, not the predecessor, to be able to invoke executive privilege. So these are delay tactics, Katie. They are they tell you a lot about what they're afraid of. They're afraid of actually just going and telling their story. If they had done nothing wrong, they tell their story and then have their spin machines, say whatever about them. But they don't want to do that because, it is a crime to lie to Congress.
And they also don't want to be seen as having any kind of complicity in terms of the planning of this event. And if in fact they were communicating with anyone, if other members of Congress might have been involved, we've heard rumors of that there were tours and kind of an advance team, if you will. I don't know. What do you think of that? It seemed weirdly spontaneous to me, but maybe that's naive of me to say.
This may be the only time in my life I'm going to call you a little naive, but on this one, I think you are. I think that it's clear that there was advanced planning and so on. I mean, Congressman Mo Brooks showed up in body armor on January 6th. So, you don't, if you're a member of Congress, you don't go show up to your own building in body armor unless you think something untoward is going to happen. And the Congress of the United States, a place that has not been attacked, the Capitol, since I think 1812.
Hey, Neal, have they called in some of those people, like the aforementioned member of Congress who came in with body armor? I mean,
right.
Have they interviewed those people? Has their testimony, by the way, just to tell you what the committee has done, Neal, they've interviewed more than 300 witnesses, issued more than 50 subpoenaed, and obtained more than 35,000 pages of records, and they're receiving hundreds of telephone tips.
Yeah, so we know that the committee has made requests to members of Congress, including Jim Jordan, to provide answers to information. And it's a little bit of a delicate thing when a member of Congress is asked to investigate another member of Congress, which is what's going on here. It's also, of course, delicate if they're investigating another branch, but that is Congress's oversight responsibilities. It's very common for them to do. So Jordan and the others could refuse to provide answers, and then again, you'd have yet another court case about that. And, Trump, if the one thing, and his allies, the one thing they're good for is like a jobs program for lawyers. I mean, basically, they're all lawyering up. They're all lawyering to basically say we're afraid to tell the truth and try and block these things in court. None of this is going to be successful, but it's all about delay because
I want to ask you about delay in a minute, but I also want to be responsive to people who are asking questions. Sharon Crump, hi Sharon, said Peter Navarro admits to the coup plot. When does he get arrested?
Yeah, it was a remarkable interview with our friend Ari Melber the other day in which Navarro basically said some of the quiet part out loud. And look, I think that there are criminal statutes that are directly at play here. And indeed, the Justice Department, to move to the other side of the investigation, the criminal law enforcement side, the Justice Department's already used some of these statutes against some of the rank and file members. So one statute, which is 18 USC 1512, makes it a crime to try and attempt to obstruct an official proceeding. And what the Justice Department said, and this has now been upheld by 3 different courts, including 2 appointed by Donald Trump, is that the official proceeding was the counting of votes on January 6th. The intent of these folks was to try and stop that, ergo federal felony. So now the question, and this is, the thing that I'm most concerned about, it's one thing to prosecute the rank and file people. It's another thing to prosecute those higher ups in the White House, President Trump's advisors, and the others who were responsible, if any, and I suspect many were, for producing the events on January 6th. And there's kind of 2 branches to this. One is you directly encourage these people. The things you said and so on, and maybe Peter Navarro is part of that, the facts will tell. The other is something that Representative Liz Cheney, who's one of the 2 Republicans on the January 6th committee, has been starting to mention, which is if you're a senior government leader, including the President of the United States, and there's an armed attack going on the Capitol, and you do nothing, then that may itself be a felony. By refusing to act, you are essentially giving aid and comfort to the insurrectionists in the stopping of the official proceeding. So for that, it really does turn on what criminal lawyers call mens rea, the criminal intent. And so it's a hard thing for prosecutors to do. They have to get into a defendant's head and ask, did they intend to do this? And so the question is, did Donald Trump intend by not doing anything to basically further the insurrection? And there's some evidence that suggests that that is exactly what's going on. And the gold mine and the January 6th on that 7. The gold mine, I think I fed out for a sec. The gold mine is that it took Trump 187 minutes to record that video, finally saying, go home. But he also said, we love you, protesters, and all the other nonsense he said. But that wasn't the first take of the video. I think that, there are reports that there was as many as 7 takes, and Trump's own White House officials thought all of them were too scary, according to some reporting. And so if they can get access to those earlier takes, you might get a sense to Donald Trump's state of mind.
And also, are there some text messages? We saw that the Fox News people were urging Mark Meadows to tell the president to stop this. Sean Hannity, a number of these Fox people were in constant communication, or at least in some communication with them. So is there more material to mine in terms of trying to determine the present, not only the president's state of mind, but the people closest to him, even Don Jr., like what the heck was going on with all these people? Wasn't he in the White House watching this unfold?
Yeah, and evidently like dancing and so on. So I think you've hit on exactly the right question. So journalist Sean Hannity is texting Mark Meadows saying the president's got to stop this early on the events of January 6th. And, that's interesting, obviously, because it says something about Hannity and Fox News. But legally, the important thing is it may demonstrate awareness on the part of Mark Meadows. And indeed, if Meadows showed that text to the president himself. I mean, it's one thing if you're caught flat-footed and unaware. You didn't know this was going on and you're scrambling and so on. It's another thing if people are telling you, Meadows, or you, Trump, hey, you got to do something, and you don't. Why didn't you? So that's what the committee's trying to get at. It's obviously hard. Trump and his minions aren't exactly known for being truth tellers. And so this does require the powers of law enforcement, including the powers of perjury, prosecutions, and the like, but for people who lie to the investigators.
Well, let's talk about, you talked about 2 separate investigations that are going on now, Neal. You talked about, we've just gone over the January 6th committee. And before I move on to the DOJ, which I know you've been pretty critical of Merrick Garland, and you were very optimistic about him taking greater action when we spoke about this before. But one thing I want to ask you, and I think other people are interested in this, is there a chance that the Republicans are going to drag their feet so much and after the midterm elections, lit this committee. What does that portend for the future of the January 6th committee if, in fact, as is expected, Republicans can regain control of Congress?
Yeah, no, that's a really important point, Katie. And indeed, I think that's the Trump strategy, which is to try and push as much of this investigation to pass the midterms, and then if the Republicans take the House, to shut it down. So, that, just to go back to our kind of our founders' principles, that's like, to me, the essence of what checks and balances is all about is, one branch investigating high level wrongdoing in another. That's got to exist. If it doesn't, if they do win the election and the president is able to, through subpoena delay tactics and the like, prevent the investigation from getting everything they need, that's going to put even more pressure on that other side of the investigation, the Justice Department side, to try and get at the truth. And I guess the Republicans could try and defund the Justice Department or something like that, to try and shut that down too. And it wouldn't surprise me if they tried that. I mean, they are willing to do anything possible to prevent the American people from learning the truth of what happened on January 6th. And that's why, I have been critical both of the Justice Department and indeed of the January 6th committee for not moving fast enough. I know this is a huge investigation and there's lots of pieces to it, but just to take one very simple example, it's very scary to me that, none of the high level people have been brought into, evidently, to the Justice Department for interviews. And we're a year after the events of January 6th. And the last thing I want to happen is for these interviews to happen sometime later and they say, hey, I forgot, I don't remember, I don't recall, in all of the things that you can do as time elapses in an investigation.
Let me ask you one other thing about the committee. It's still waiting on another crucial disclosure, 800 pages of Donald Trump's official records and communications related to January 6th. That's currently being litigated in the courts. Can you bring us up to speed, Neal, in terms of what is happening? And is the committee likely to get their hands on those records, which seem to be so critical?
Yeah, committee's certainly going to get their hands on these records. There's no chance that Trump will win this. So Trump has invoked that doctrine we talked about before, executive privilege, which is a real doctrine. It's for really important reasons. Basically, like if the president's engaged in like foreign affairs negotiations or something like that, you don't want that to come out into open court in some civil lawsuit or something like that. So that's what the doctrine's about. What Trump's using it for is to protect and shield any inquiry into what he did on January 6th. Nobody worth their salt thinks that that is an actually right invocation of executive privilege, both because it's the subject matter, insurrection and an attack on the United States far exceeds any presidential secrecy notion, but also because the current president, both Joe Biden, has rejected these claims of executive privilege. And now, two different courts have. The trial court did really quickly, and did the Court of Appeals, our nation's second highest court, in a 68-page opinion that just obliterated Trump. I mean, it was just not close. So Trump has now asked the Supreme Court to hear that case. I don't think they will. It's, normally when a former president asks the Supreme Court to hear something, they hear it. But there's got to be some merit to the thing. There's really no merit to the thing. So I think Congress gets these documents.
But when will the Supreme Court say, sorry, Charlie, we're not going to review this case if in fact that is the decision? And do you really have confidence in, I mean, it's been so stacked by the president, that they will refuse to hear the case?
So it's certainly the case. President Trump put 3 people on the court, and they're extremely conservative, but notably all 3 of them in all of the, election joke disputes, every time Trump tried to bring a case to the Supreme Court, he lost. And indeed, Trump lost the tax returns case earlier when he tried to keep his tax returns public, including the justices that he put on the court. So, look, I mean, I think this is an incredibly conservative court, but I think it's a court that, when faced with this executive privilege question as opposed to, for example, something we've talked about before, Roe versus Wade. I think on this, they're going to do the right thing on executive privilege. It's just there's nothing really to Trump's thing. He just looks scared of telling the truth.
Can you give us any kind of time frame, Neal? Because as you mentioned, time is of the essence. So when are they likely to get? To me, this sounds like really a crucial document dump, 800 pages of his official records and communications related to this. So when will they get them?
Yeah, I think certainly by the end of February, the court will have denied this case. They could hear it, but even if they do decide to hear it, I think that we will have a decision in a couple months after that, and it's not going to go well for Trump.
If you all have any questions, please put them in the comments. I hope I'm not covering that pretty face of yours, Neal, with the comments. I never quite know how to do this, but after doing a million of these, I wanted to ask you one other question about before we get to DOJ, sorry, and that's this Willard Hotel war room, his outside legal team. This does make me look very naive about it being a spontaneous event. I'd like to concede that here and now. But he apparently, this is where Trump's outside legal team, Rudy Giuliani, Bernie Kerik, who's the former NYC police commissioner, lawyer John Eastman, camped out days before January 6th. Now, finally, Kerik has provided the committee with documents. Do you think this is going to be a promising lead that could result in legal action or possibly something that DOJ will investigate?
Yes. They called it a command center, but set up at the Willard Hotel with a whole bunch of different rooms, with a whole bunch of different, basically, coup plotters. And, I think whenever you get a number of people together for concerted criminal activity, that law enforcement has tools available. They just put you in different rooms and they start interviewing you and saying, tell me what happened. And if you tell the truth, you're going to get, less of a sentence, or indeed no sentence at all if you cooperate enough. So this is what creates what we call prisoners' dilemmas and the like. The problem is, so far, all of the Trump folks, I think when it comes to serious questions, are refusing to answer. So we don't know what Bernie Kerik answered and what he didn't answer, but I suspect, under, direction from the former president, he probably didn't answer some questions. And so it's going to take that subpoena, that forcible action in court to say, you've got to tell the truth, otherwise you're going to jail. And this is going to put, I think, Merrick Garland in some really difficult circumstances. I mean, I'm sure he doesn't relish the idea of jailing President Trump's former advisors, Steve Bannon or anyone else, and he shouldn't.
But nobody's above the law, Neal. I mean, it is what it is, right? And someone just points out, I thought this was a good question. If Mark Meadows, so thank you, Shanti. I think it's Shanti. I don't know, everyone. If Mark Meadows and Steve Bannon just plead the fifth or just go to jail for not testifying, does that mean they can just serve the 1-year sentence and then get away with everything? What is the sentence for contempt of Congress?
Yeah, it is only up to a year. There may be other actions available. You might be able to bring a subsequent contempt action for other evidence or the like, but the punishment as it is written is 1 year. And I think, Katie, what you were saying before is exactly right. Nobody is above the law. And the whole Trump playbook is to take all of these laws and doctrines and customs and beliefs, which depend in the end on good faith of the president and his advisors, and to blow it up and to basically act with shrill disregard for any norms, any values, any notion of truth seeking and the like. And so that's what puts Garland in the position. It's not his fault that you've got a bunch of former presidential advisors who are acting so lawlessly. He's got to act. And, this is the part that I am concerned about. I don't know, and I'm a big fan of Merrick Garland. I used to argue cases in front of him, and he was easily the most prepared judge I'd ever met. I mean, down to every footnote and the like, brilliant, careful, meticulous, all the things you want in a judge. And I think as Attorney General, he's done that too in so many different respects. But I am concerned about this one because, so far I don't see any signs that Garland is investigating higher ups at the White House and the presidential advisors, in and out of government that were responsible for the January 6th attacks.
Really? And why not?
Yeah, well, if there were such an investigation, normally you would have leaks of it, not necessarily by the FBI agents who are controlling it. Sometimes that happens, but just by the people you bring in. So if Trump or Pence were interviewed by Garland, either they would say something, or their lawyers, which is the Trump playbook, would go into court to try and block the interview and say, hey, this is, violates some, made up right that they have. We've seen nothing, no signs whatsoever in a year that there is an investigation going on. Now, it might be going on. I
I
write about.
say, with all due respect, Neal, maybe you're just not privy to it, and maybe
Right.
it's being kept very, very close to the vest and secretive.
Exactly. So, this is what I wrote about in today's Atlantic Magazine article. Is there's two possibilities, and God, I hope the one that you're reverting to is right, which is there is an investigation, and Garland is so good, and he is so good. He's so good that he's kept it all totally quiet, and we just don't know about it. That's one option. Option two is he's actually not doing that. He is worried about indicting, high-ranking people and the like, and so he's closed those off. And we just don't know which one it is, and that's why I just think it's a legitimate worry at this point, not more than that. Certainly, the Attorney General yesterday said nobody is above the law. Anyone at any level who's responsible, he'll go after. But we are a year into it, and we don't have any confirmation. And while it's true that the Justice Department generally doesn't confirm criminal investigations, the guiding document, the U.S. Attorney's Manual, does permit them to do so when the public confidence so requires. We may not be at that point yet, but I think we're pretty close. I mean, we're talking about potentially a president of the United States in the office, aiding and comforting insurrectionists. So yeah, I think there needs to be an investigation. And in the piece, and I'll just read this to you. I quote someone who said this on January 6th. There's no question, none, that Trump is practically and morally responsible provoking the events of the day. No question about it. The people who stormed this building believed they were acting on the wishes and instructions of their president. The leader of the free world can't spend weeks thundering that shadowy forces are stealing our country and then feign surprise when people believe him and do reckless things. Okay, so that was said on January 6th by a guy named Mitch McConnell. And McConnell goes on to say, look, I'm not going to convict the president for impeachment, but only because of this constitutional quirk that a former president can't be impeached. And he goes on to say, but there are criminal sanctions available against the president. So that's where we were a year ago. And if you ask me what is so disheartening, far more than what the Justice Department's doing or Congress and with the January 6th committee, is that we've just had this collective amnesia, at least among Republicans, of what happened on January 6th. And, Jake Tapper called it that day on January 6th. He said, watch your screens, watch what people are saying, because people are going to try and whitewash this history. And at the time, I think you and I were on one of these Instagram shows. I was like, God, I hope not. I hope this is the turning point. I hope this is when people can come together and realize, what is so important about this country and what is gravely being attacked right now. And that didn't happen. Instead, we've continued the same polarization and lies about the election in January 6th. And, people like McConnell or Lindsey Graham, who stood up to the president briefly last year, are now fully in the tank again.
It is so disconcerting. And Lindsey Graham, finally had some harsh words and then was at Mar-a-Lago not too much later, because obviously Donald Trump still has this, this grip on the Republican Party, which is full of cowards, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I can't agree more. And the one bright spot is Liz Cheney. Now, Liz Cheney was a person who has attacked me in ways I can't even, she used to run ads against me, calling me part of the Al Qaeda 7 at the Justice Department because I had represented pro bono someone who was at Guantanamo. I mean, she did a lot of reprehensible things, but boy, she is, redeemed herself on this and stood up and said, basically, this president acted lawlessly against American traditions. And, as I look for hope in dark times, I look to her.
And in fact, she's been hinting that the House Select Committee examining January 6th might order the DOJ to consider prosecuting former President Trump on the grounds that he obstructed official proceedings. What do you think about that? Do you think that if in fact they aren't acting quickly enough or acting enough to really bring in some of these high level officials, is that something that is obviously within her power?
100% within her power to refer, it's called a criminal referral, a matter to the Justice Department for investigation and possible prosecution. She can't order someone to prosecute. One branch can't order another to do something, but she can, in the committee, can say, look, we want you to take a look at this. And that's certainly been done by many congressional committees in the past. And indeed, that's actually what happened with Steve Bannon and Mark Meadows. They're both examples in which Congress said, look, this guy's refusing to testify and tell the truth. We're referring this to you for potential prosecution. And I think it's important, like people like me are not saying right now, go indict President Trump. We don't have all the evidence. We are saying, go investigate what happened on this important day. I mean, if this were a company or if this were, something that happened among private individuals, there'd be an investigation right away. The idea that we're not going to investigate, the president and those around him is very scary to me. So I sure hope it's going on right now. If it's not going on right now, I sure hope that the January 6th Congressional Committee tells the Justice Department, look, we'd like that to be going on
now. Let's see. What about Barr's actions? Someone is asking. Obviously he sort of split with the president shortly after January 6th. I think he had finally had enough. By the way, someone said, this is terrible, Katie, time to stop following you. And I'm like, bye, Felicia. Anyway, so what do you think of Bill Barr? Does he have any role in all of this?
Well, we don't know. He left before a lot of these events. He probably saw the writing on the wall. I mean, Barr is good at protecting Barr. And so we don't know. We do know that, his replacement, his acting replacement, Jeffrey Rosen, did stand up to the president who was trying to get him to use the Justice Department's powers in court to try and attack the elections. And then you have this other guy who's like a much lower level person at the Justice Department, Jeffrey Clark, maneuvering with Trump to become the new attorney general and to file all these bogus actions. And the only reason that didn't happen is because the senior leadership of the Justice Department, these were all people in the tank for Trump, but they all threatened to resign if that happened. So the whole thing is kind of a constitutional nightmare, to use the technical legal term. This is why what Congress is doing here is so important, just to get the truth. I mean, look, I think jail time is really important for anyone who is involved, but I also just think the narrative and understanding what happened in the same way as, that September 11th report that Congress did was so important in documenting everything that led up to and created the events. Same thing here. We got to understand it all.
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, if people are just joining us, I'm talking to Neal Katyal, who is the former acting Solicitor General of the U.S. He's a law professor at Georgetown, my late husband's alma mater, Georgetown, and a partner at Hogan Lovells. And he specializes in constitutional law, national security, and criminal defense. And by the way, you guys, I am going to save this conversation so you can watch it at your leisure, as they say, later if you have a chance, because I do think Neal is so good at just explaining things well, intelligently, and accessibly. What are some of the other things that maybe would be helpful to people watching, Neal, that I haven't addressed in our conversation?
Well, I think you've actually hit on it. So really what we're trying to do is understand the two different investigations, one in Congress, one at the Justice Department. And the Justice Department one is, they've indicted, I think, 700 people or something like that. But again, they're all rank and file people generally. So you've got those two investigations. And then you have, I think the last thing to maybe mention is just this remarkable speech by the president today. I have to say, you know, I generally don't look to Washington, D.C. politicians for eloquence, but I thought it was incredibly well done and past time to give a speech like that. I don't like the idea of an incumbent president criticizing a former one. You know, but Trump has opened the door to all that with all of his nonsense attacks, you know, breaking with the protocol of, you know, presidents like George W. Bush and the like, who'd never said, or Obama, who basically, you know, tried so hard to not say anything about his about the successor president. But since Trump has done so much to basically blow past that norm, you know, I think Biden was very much justified in doing it and drawing attention to, you know, and this is something, Katie, you had mentioned at the start of the show, there's a connection between January 6th and all the voting deprivations we're seeing today. And Merrick Garland made the same point yesterday, which is, you know, what is January 6th about? In the end, it's about saying, you know, our votes matter more than yours. And that's what, you know, now state after state has been doing after the November election. Over 20 states have passed restrictive voting bills to make it harder for people to vote. And for most of our lifetime, they couldn't do that because the Voting Rights Act of 1965 said anytime a state does that, at least a state that had some history of discrimination, it had to get pre-cleared by a court in order to be done. And I defended that provision back in the Supreme Court in 2010 and won. But then a few years later, the Supreme Court reversed itself and struck it down. And so in a case called Shelby County. And that's why so much of this stuff is happening now, because the Supreme Court has gutted the Voting Rights Act. And so what President Biden is trying to do is to say, let's have a new Voting Rights Act. And he's got the support of a majority of people in Congress for it, in both the House and the Senate. What he doesn't have is a filibuster-proof majority, because that requires 60 votes. And so now the question is, will the president be able to basically carve this out from the filibuster and to change the rules to permit this to pass by a majority vote? And I sure hope so, because to me, nothing's more important. It's why my parents came to this country. Nothing's more important than democracy and the ability of people to vote. And if a minority can block that, then they can entrench themselves into power for all time. And that's just so antithetical to who we are as Americans.
Well, I have an excellent interview that we're going to be posting this afternoon about that topic, not only about voting rights, but the fact that all these election officials are being replaced by those who adhere to the big lie. So in other words, the foundation is being laid right now to actually rig the 2024 election and to discount certain votes so that the will of the people will be ignored, which I think is even more terrifying, Neal. It's one thing, obviously, both are equally concerning, but that you could actually ignore the outcome of a state of the will of the people in a particular state, because the slate of election officials or the Secretary of State in charge of those elections decides to change the results.
Yeah,
it's insane.
You got it. So there's basically a two-pronged attack for the Republicans are launching now. One is to change the laws to make it harder to vote. The second is to create fail-safe mechanisms for them if they do lose the election, so that the Secretary of State can make a different call, or state, like this is going on in Arizona, the state legislature can say, hey, we disagree with the popular vote of, in Arizona of who won the presidency. We're going to pick the winner ourselves and get a do-over. It's kind of crazy that our Constitution would tolerate that, but, there is an argument that it does.
And Mr. Constitutional Expert, how in the hell can this happen?
Well, because initially when the founders wrote the Constitution, they didn't want as much direct democracy as we have now. So, for example, before the 17th Amendment, you didn't actually elect the senators directly. It was the state legislatures that did that. And so you have these kinds of quirky things, and we've existed with them because you have politicians who don't break norms too much up until Trump. And so, yes, there was always this kind of crazy anti-democratic playbook, which could be invoked in the 20th and 21st centuries, but nobody would want to do it. But now the Republicans are basically desperate because I don't think they have a majority of the popular vote. So they're looking for all the mechanisms they can to try and block as many people who were against them from voting or to toss out their votes and get redos. And that's the situation we're in, which is why, you do need something like this Voting Rights Act to just come in and just make sure that people can vote and that their votes will be counted.
I'm trying to block the comments, even though people are very smart watching this, because they're complaining that it's covering their faces, that you're covering your face, Neal. Hey, sorry, everyone. I'm trying to figure out how to block the comments. Usually I know how to do this, Neal. Julia, if you want to tell me how to do this, let me know, because I have young people who are helping me with this. Neal and I have been having this long conversation.
Neal.
Okay.
Hey, man. Great to see you.
Good to see you. Are you in Aspen?
No, I'm in DC.
Yeah.
Anyway, love you, but we got a couple more things to talk about.
My comments blocked.
Huh?
Do you want any?
Yeah, I just can't figure out how to get rid of the comments because they're blocking Neal's cute face. Anyway, Neal, I had to ask you a couple more. Oh, Adrian, I can't see that. You have to tell me in the thing. Neal, I just wanted to review the arrests of the people who participated in the insurrection, because I feel like this is super helpful for me to kind of, and for everybody watching, hopefully, to kind of get an update on that. So according to DOJ statistics, there have been 725 plus arrests, 225 for assaulting, resisting, or impeding officers, 75 people for using a deadly or dangerous weapon, and the FBI is still looking for 250 people believed to have committed the violence. What has happened to a lot of these people? Are they getting reduced sentences? Do you feel like justice is being served in terms of the people who broke into the Capitol and threatened lawmakers and in some cases injured, severely injured Capitol and Metropolitan police officers?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a big sprawling investigation. I'm a little bit of a softie when it comes to jail time. So, but if you break into the Capitol and, threaten lives of members of Congress and terrify people and lead to the deaths of, individuals and absolutely should be responsible. There are degrees of culpability. There were some people who were just mere followers on who weren't engaged in any violence directly. I think those are the people who have gotten the lightest sentences. I think Judge Garland yesterday said also people who accepted their responsibility early, those people got light sentences. The thing that's still mystifying to me, and I really want January 6th folks, the committee, to get to the bottom of this, is how did we let all these people go last year on January 6th? I mean, I was involved with a lot of the Black Lives Matter stuff, and, they certainly didn't let anyone go. If there was ever a risk of violence and the like, the idea that, and Trump, even launching tear gas at Lafayette Square and things like that, but here they just let, hundreds and hundreds of people go. And it's taken the sleuthing of lots of private citizens scouring social media and the like to figure out who was where, because, a lot of these idiots bragged about it on the night of January 6th. And so thankfully, these private armies have really helped, armies of individual volunteers have helped identify a lot of the folks, but a lot still haven't been identified. And again, to me, what I'm really concerned about is the higher ups, because I really, if we let Trump and his minions get away with this for what they did in 2021, there's nothing to stop them from doing it after the congressional elections this year, or the presidential election in 24 or 28, or the like. We need to have the harshest, strongest message now that if you act this way, that's a criminal act, and you're going to be put in jail.
And in fact, a recent poll showed 34% of Americans say violence against the government can be justified. I don't know if you saw that, which was incredibly disconcerting. More than 1 in 3 people in this country believe violence against the government can be justified. And I believe something like 60% say they expect future violence to protest the electoral process. I think we can close by saying that, a lot of people think no, I don't think a lot of people, but some people perhaps think it's being alarmist when we start to talk about the end of democracy. We talk about laying the foundation for authoritarian rule. And I'm curious, Neal, you're a student of history as well as law. What are your concerns about, we kind of all, how we spend our days is how we spend our lives, Annie Dillard says. And, I think we kind of sometimes don't take a step back and look at everything that has transpired and consider the impact of some of these events. And for someone like you, Neal, when you see what is happening and the building blocks that are being placed and the actions that we've witnessed a year ago or even prior to that, what are your concerns about the future of the country? It almost makes me cry.
Yeah. No, I do cry. I'm very concerned. And you're absolutely right to be concerned. And, if you want evidence of this, just think of the fact that last year, just a year ago, our 10 living former secretaries of defense basically wrote an op-ed together. This is led by Dick Cheney to write an op-ed basically worrying about these things and worrying that we are moving to an authoritarian kind of presidency in Donald Trump. And, I've always thought and believed, as Dr. King says, that the arc of justice bends in this country toward justice, but it's long and it only bends that way because we bend it. We make that thing happen. And I am concerned that there are fewer and fewer people who are thinking about this country the way that, like Biden said it today, you don't love this country only when you win. You win it, whether you win or lose, you love the country. You recognize the glue that brings us together. Part of that glue is resolving our disagreements with words and debate, not with violence, like now 34% of Americans evidently are enamored of. And so we need to somehow figure out a way to tell our story again and remind people of how much more we have in common. And, those are platitudes by politicians. I don't think they work when, even, Biden or whomever talks about this. I mean, it's good that they do. But when you only have one side, one political party talking in unity terms and the other talking in, kind of coup terms, it doesn't work. So I think it's up on all of us. And we have to figure out ways to try and do that. I'm going to launch a civics show for kids that's going to be about this and about basically.
That's awesome. If I
Yeah.
can help with that, let me know, because I think it's so critically important. And, John and I watched a documentary that some people on our team recommended called 4 Hours at the Capitol on HBO last night. I cannot recommend it strongly enough. But, John said to me, the people who involved in this insurrection truly think they're think they were doing their patriotic duty. But I think that was fueled by lies and disinformation about, sex trafficking and about unfair elections, which the Brennan Center has shown that we had a very fair election in 2020. But they believe in their souls that they were somehow doing the right thing. And I think it was, amplified, or, the mob mentality that took hold, which was really scary, kind of more of a psychological issue. So I think also, I think I said on Bill Maher and gotten a lot of trouble about some of these people needing to be deprogrammed. And I didn't mean it as an insult to them. I meant it as a warning about the kind of falsehoods that they're being fed and that they're metabolizing and processing and being shaped by. So to me, that is almost that is one of the biggest problems, is that people are getting fed misinformation, disinformation, and they believe it. And I don't know. What do we do about that, Neal?
No, you're 100% right. I mean, when I was in the government, we were so careful in positions of responsibility to never use any language that could be picked up by people and used in some sort of hostile way. And that's been the way every president has behaved, George W. Bush or whomever, in our lifetimes. And then you've got Trump, who's like actively encouraging the violence and then saying, oh, who, me? I didn't do anything. The degree of, kind of studied ignorance around the impacts of his words is remarkable. There's a piece, I think, in the Post today, basically, thinking about the old "who will rid me of this meddlesome priest" language, and that is basically Trump. And, he is only smart enough to know that. But he is smart enough to know he doesn't have to directly order something. He can just actively encourage it through these kinds of word games.
Well, then you saw him announcing on this documentary almost 4 hours later to please go home, as we talked about earlier, and they disbanded immediately. And to me, that shows how powerful his rhetoric is. And if he had only said something prior to that, when they started crashing the windows and beating Capitol police officers who were so outnumbered, he could have, I think, doused this thing almost immediately. And he, for whatever reason, failed to do that.
100%. And while we've been talking about criminal responsibility and governmental responsibility and the like, just on a human level, could you imagine being that person, the president? You have the power to stop this and you don't, and then people die. I mean, how do you live with yourself? It requires essentially no shame, and that's what the guy has. I find it just important.
Well, on a happier note, do you think, or somewhat happier note, do you feel confident that we're going to actually learn everything we need to learn about that day?
I don't know that we'll learn everything because the Trump people lie so much. And, I suspect there's some document destruction. I don't know, but I suspect that there is. And so, I'm not sure we'll learn everything, but I think we'll learn enough. I think that we've got, through Congress and hopefully the Justice Department, a serious investigation that will tell the broad outlines of what happened.
Well, we've been talking about this for almost an hour, Neal. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think people really, really appreciate your intelligence and insight. So thank you for spending all this time with me. Neal has a new piece in The Atlantic, which is producing really high quality, excellent journalism. So everyone should check that out. I'm going to save this, and we'll also feature it tomorrow in Wake Up Call by going to katiecouric.com. Hey, Neal, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
I appreciate it too. Happy New Year. Bye-bye.
Thank you.